Welcome to the Last in Line podcast, where we discuss faith, hope, and truth in the lives of amazing servant leaders. You are in the right place if you crave purpose and if you hunger for a life of significance. This podcast applies biblical truth to our daily lives, and we pray that you walk away encouraged and inspired. This is the Last in Line podcast.
I'd like to welcome back Trey Morgan to Last in Line podcast. He and his wife Lee have been in marriage ministry for over 30 years. They've been married 35 years. They were youth group sweethearts at church and have 4 sons who are grown now, live in the Lubbock area where Trey and Lee have recently moved. Spent many years in the Childress, Texas area in ministry and as pastors, and now are at a different church in the Lubbock area. But they run a ministry called The Stronger Marriage, and they do a podcast. They've written books. They conduct workshops that are once or twice a month, and they are booked out 4 years in advance, which is crazy. That's just unheard of. But They do, like I said, once a month, twice a month. They do these weekend workshops. But Trey talks a lot about what's been good in their marriage, what's worked, what he's had to learn the hard way, advice to pre-marital couples, advice to empty nesters, and just some things he wishes he would have known or learned quicker in marriage. And he's pretty transparent about what he and his wife deal with and the things that they see in couples that they minister to and counsel. And he gives us kind of the answers to the test, an inside look as to some of their workshops and what has been game-changing for couples. So I hope you enjoy this. It's his second appearance. If you haven't seen it, it was a couple years ago. We talked this time about his background in ministry, and so you'll get to know who he is if you don't already. But listen to the entirety of the podcast. He really does challenge us Christian men in ways that we need to hear. So with that, please welcome Trey Morgan to Last in Line podcast. Trey Morgan, welcome back for your second appearance in a couple years on Last in Line podcast. Good to see you.
Honored to be here. Thanks for having me on. And I always love hanging out with you and having the opportunity to visit with all the folks that listen to your awesome podcast.
Yeah, we've got a lot, I would say, if not all, married Christian men listening. So we're all hanging in the balance as to what world problems you're going to solve today. And we're all got our notepads out. We're all hitting the record button. So no pressure.
Well, I tell you what, if I give you an answer that's going to be life-changing, it'll be because I've learned it from either doing it wrong and this is the right way to do it, or this is what the Bible has taught me on how to do it. And if I just stick to that, it's going to be all right.
And it only took me reading that verse about 100 times before I got it. That'd be my line.
There you go.
That would be mine. So, exactly. All right. So you guys, you and your wife, Lee, do a ministry called Stronger Marriages, and you have a podcast, I think, and vocationally, you've been working at a church for a while over in Childress, Texas, but then recently moved to Lubbock, Texas, to a bigger church and probably a little more demanding on your time, but you're still managing to do maybe 1 or 2 of these workshops a month. Tell maybe the listeners who haven't caught our first episode a couple of years ago how you and Lee got into that particular dynamic of doing workshops, and then just kind of how you guys met too. I'd like to know that story.
Sure. Lee and I were youth group sweethearts. Sometimes we say high school sweethearts, but we didn't attend high school together. We grew up in a big town. We went to church together. Our families did. And so we were in the youth group together, and we started dating in the youth group, and just through the youth group dated. And then I was a year ahead of her, a couple of years ahead of her. And I went to seminary for a year. It was a 2-year program, and waited for her to get out of high school. This was the 80s. You could do this. Waited for her to get out of high school. We had plans to get married, and both our parents all approved. And as soon as she graduated from high school, she took off and did seminary with me. And we've been in ministry since we were 22 and 19, something like that. Yeah, I mean, very, very young. We started young. I have worked with youth programs but mainly a lead minister, lead pastor, preaching minister, whatever you want to call it, for the past 30 plus years. And we've been in Childress, Texas for 21, where we worked with a church. We had planned to retire there. It was a great place to raise kids. It was a small community, and all of our kids we have 4 boys, and when they went to school, they all went to school in Lubbock, and they've all planted in Lubbock, Texas. And so all 4 of my boys, their wives, and my 2 grandchildren live in Lubbock. And about a year ago, we had a church in Lubbock that called and said, would you be interested in coming to Lubbock? And it was the church where my kids all attend, and my grandkids. Yeah, I mean, it was like a no-brainer, right? And so we had told a lot of churches we're not interested in moving, but we told this church we would have a conversation because they had something that we really were desiring, which was to be back involved in our kids and grandkids' lives. And so we made the move in January, and went from working with a church that was about 400 to one that's about 1,400. And so that's been a big transition and change. And so my time has been a little bit more busy just because I'm trying to learn so many people and so many names and everything else. But we love it. We're still doing just as many workshops as we did. We try to do 1 to 2 a month, depending on locations of the workshops. And that's kind of been our goal. We've been doing these for about 15 years after thinking about it. It was kind of a God thing. We did a retreat, a marriage retreat for a church, and then another church called and said, hey, you did one over there, come do one for us. Before you knew it, 2 or 3 years down the road, we had churches going, hey, can you come do one for us? And before you knew it, we were just doing 1 a month. And they're not retreats, they're more conferences now. And we're flying to Franklin, Tennessee this weekend, where we'll do one there. We've got it's sold out. They only could hold about 75 couples. And so it filled up pretty quick and sold out. It's at a hotel. And so we're excited about it. We'll fly out on a Thursday, fly back on a Saturday, and I will be back in time to teach a Bible class and preach on Sunday morning, which is something all the time. And that's
good, man. It seems like a sweet spot for you guys.
It is. And that was way more than probably you needed to know.
No. That helps me because it kind of stirred a question in me that I didn't have planned. So if you take out the equation, the kids living in Lubbock, because that's a slam dunk. I mean, that door was gaping wide open for you guys to walk through. If you take that out of the equation, what are some things you could give as advice to consider when making moves like that? Maybe it's not just uprooting your entire career and flipping it on its head, but maybe just an opportunity that seems God, and in your case, obviously it was. What can you tell people about maybe hearing from God in transition moments or making those decisions? Yeah.
Well, we feel like there were times we prayed specifically. We prayed bold prayers. Lord, we would like you to show us what you want, because we were still not 100% sure that we were going to make that move, because we had a great work that we were doing in Childress. The great thing is we knew even if we moved to Lubbock, it was going to be a win-win for us, because it was going to be a great work, and we were going to keep doing work for God, whether it was in one place or another. But the main thing that we had to understand was that this was not a financial decision. This is going to be a better quality of life decision. This is a substantial upgrade in work relations decision. It was more of this is where our family is, and to be a spiritual part of my family again, more than 2 or 3 times a year when I was seeing them. Now we see family nearly every day. We eat Sunday lunch every Sunday. And so now I'm back in their life, and their mom is back in their life as a spiritual influence to them. And now we get to be a part of our grandkids' lives and have a spiritual influence on them as well. And that's huge. That is just beyond whatever anybody could say, we'll pay you this much if you'll come. When you can step back into the role of being a prophet, a priest in your family, someone who speaks on behalf of God, someone who is there to talk to your kids and grandkids. It's just such a healthy thing. there, speaking of them bold prayers, there were times where we felt like God was giving us some really good answers. I remember driving down the road and we were having conversation about what do you think we should do? And I got on the phone with a friend that did not know we were looking at moving. And I was calling about a workshop, and I said, "Hey, what have you been doing this morning?" He said, "I was having breakfast with my grandkids." And I said, "Ah, you live in the same town with your grandkids?" And he said, "Yes, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. No matter what anybody tried to pay me, I would not give up being a part of my grandkids' lives." And I looked over at my wife like, it was on speakerphone, and I looked over at my wife like, is this not God kind of trying to tell us, and on with this big grandparent speech, and we didn't ask for any of it.
Yeah.
He just spoke it and shared it. And it was just kind of like God was speaking through his voice going, what are you waiting on?
Dude,
And
that's so good.
It was one of those things that we really, it was a hard decision. We love our family in Childress and our folks back, but they all understood. I don't think any of them were upset because they said, hey, this is about a family move. And who's ever going to complain about somebody doing something to spiritually be a bigger part of their family?
Well, the dots all lined up, and it was too perfect to not do that. And I only have one grandchild, but she's brand new, and we see them every day almost. And like you, we kind of created a couple years ago the Sunday after church. Everybody comes over and we have the lunch, and so you can't there's not a price on that, and that's really what is eternal. Those seeds you plant there are eternal. Not that some of the others aren't in our ministries, but still those make a huge difference, and even in our lives. But golly, I think that's pretty cool.
Let me throw one more thing out there. I think Noah, Noah preached for 120 years while he worked on an ark, trying to get somebody to come get on with him. The only people that he was able to get on the ark with him was his wife, his sons, and their wives. I call that extremely successful. And if someday I get to the end of my life and the only people that I've got to go to heaven with me are my wife and my kids and their wives, I have been extremely successful. And so you've got to remember, while I may do ministry to a couple of thousand people on Sundays, your family is still your number one priority, and it's just a huge deal. Huge deal.
Yeah. Well, as I transition a little bit, I'm almost going to jump right into some heavy subjects because I'd love to get your wisdom on some things. And selfishly, I think it could benefit me in my marriage. So it's going to be a win-win for everybody. But in regards to your faith, you've been a Christian for a long time. Like you said, you're at your youth, and I'm sure even before that, you became a follower of Christ. And all those years, when you look back in that early time of being a Christian, and obviously as a teenager, it's different than what you would say to a new Christian who's 30, but what do you kind of wish somebody would have told you about being a Christian, a man of faith, what you might be up against, what your requirements are as a Christian man leading a family? So what would you hope someone would, or wish someone would have told you?
And they probably did, and I was probably a little hard-headed, and I may have been a little bit on the slow side of learning it. But I would have loved, if I could go back and catch my 24-year-old self or my 26, 28-year-old self as a young father, I would remind myself over and over that it is about being not just the dad that plays ball with your kids and wrestles on the trampoline with your kids. It's not just about the dad that plays video games and has fun. It's even more important is being the dad that spiritually leads your kids. And too many times, too many dads leave that role to mom. They come in and they kind of go, hey, I'll teach my kids to fish, or I'll teach my kids to hunt. I can teach them how to hit baseball, but mom's the one that is going to deal with them when it comes to things to pray about, taking them to church, telling them they did good on whatever it is. And I think I would have loved to have started earlier in life, and I would love to get men earlier pointed toward, don't just be the dad. If you're the dad that teaches your kids how to hunt a deer and clean a fish and hit a baseball, but don't lead them spiritually, you failed as a dad. You really have, because being a dad is a whole lot more than raising an athlete, attending baseball games. Being a dad is a whole lot more than teaching your kids outdoor stuff and having fun going to golf course. It's about being a spiritual man who leads your family, who prays with your family, who steps up and has the hard conversations with your kids. That's not mama's job. God did not put you in their life so that they could have a buddy. He put you in their life so you could be their parent. And so you have to have those hard conversations of, what are you looking at on your cell phone? Or is anyone at school trying to talk you into doing anything that's making you uncomfortable, sexually, with drugs, with alcohol, whatever it is. But those conversations, I've had conversations with my sons about, I know you've got a serious girlfriend, or I know you're currently engaged, but there's certain ways that God has lined out that we do things in our relationship, getting to know somebody physically, emotionally, spiritually, and lastly, sexually after marriage. And those are not conversations that I have fun talking about with my kids. But as a dad, that's something I have to do because God's given me that job. Ephesians 6 verse 4 says, fathers, train your kids. And he's not talking about hitting balls and how to catch fish.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to dads who may be 100% on board with what you're saying, but they almost disqualify the conversation because they just chalk it up to, well, my kid's not going to listen. They're a teenager, or they're they don't want to hear that from me, or my kid's it's just going to be an argument. What do you say to that, Dad?
I would say you think that's the case, but they'll get more out of it than you will ever know. And they may blow you off, or they may ignore you. And my kids were all there when they were teenagers, and they would be frustrated with me for bringing this up or doing this or disciplining them, whatever it was. And now as adults, they are some of my best friends in the world because I was their parent at that time in their life and not their buddy. You got time to be their friend when they get older, and they're out of the house and they're making decisions on their own. But when they're in your home, your job is to teach them and tell them and to parent them. And that makes a world of difference. And you don't think they're getting anything, but I can promise you they're getting something out of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, being 3.5 decades in this ministry of marriage and helping people with pre-marriage and marriage and counseling and couples, maybe not therapy, but couples just empowerment. What would you say? I kind of want to figure out how I want to answer. What's a head scratcher that's sort of a common theme that couples are struggling with? You're just kind of, when you walk away, let's just say you walk away from a workshop and you're like, God, it was a lot of people dealing with X. And it's just it kind of frustrates you. It's a head scratcher. It's a burden kind of spiritually that you carry. What is going on right now in the world with married couples that's a head scratcher for you?
Well, part of it is the age-old problem of busyness and how that relates to the family. One of the things I love about our workshops is generally speaking, we do have some couples that come that are struggling, but the majority of the couples that come to our workshops are couples that are doing well, which tells you a whole lot about, man, if you want to do marriage well, don't wait till you're having a problem to go to a workshop. Go to a workshop when you're doing well. But what we see, what my wife and I have noticed all the time, is how families have allowed themselves to get so busy that they have a hard time being family. And couples have a hard time being husband and wife because they've become so busy in families. One of the greatest benefits of 2020 was it halted families and made everybody just stop for a while. Families were outside taking walks, and they were playing board games, and they were going on bike rides. And we talked about how it was our dream that when things kind of started opening back up, that families wouldn't be so quick to get involved in 14 things, pick one or two and still do family things. And the problem is we've kind of gone back to going, hey, my son plays 4 sports and my daughter has 13 activities, and we have no nights at home. And when we do come at home, we take fast food and we eat in front of the television set, and there's just no quality of family. And before you know it, kids are out of the house. They talk about, well, we had fun in sports, but you don't have family fun anymore. I'm not anti-sport. I want to throw this out here real quick. All of my kids played sports. I had some really good athletes, but we also understood that there was a whole lot more in life than sports. And today you got families that are so busy that they just don't have time for anything. And what families really need to do is figure out a way to get back around the dinner table, to have a meal every night or close to it around the dinner table, not in front of the television set. Even if you've got takeout and you're going, but it'd be so easy to eat pizza and watch a movie together. Sit around the table and visit and talk about what's going on in your kids' lives. And that's just such a great opportunity. We've just become so busy. And married couples have taken off their husband wife hat and they put on their parents hat, and they basically, for the time that their kids are in their home, they're mom and dad, and they kind of stop being husband and wife. And then when the last kid leaves the home, they're looking across the table at each other going, I really don't know who you are, because really hadn't been husband and wife for the last 20 years or whatever it is. And that's hard on marriages. There's a spike in the divorce rate at empty nest. And a lot of that's because couples aren't being married. They're just being mom and dad when the kids are home. I can promise you, if you're flirting while the kids are home, if you're being affectionate while the kids are home, if you're going on dates while the kids are still at home, if you're taking occasional trips, just the two of you while the kids are home, if you're being intimate while the kids are home, when they leave, man, empty nest is going to be fun, because you're just going to keep on doing that.
That's good. I like that. I mean, I trust that you keep your ear to the ground just as a general rule for marriage and the statistics that are out there, and just the state of the union when it comes to marriage in America. Even though you get a lot of the couples, like you said, are not a train wreck, right? They're really kind of thriving. But
we get some train wrecks too.
Yeah. But you can see in the country, you can see as a whole, like you said, divorce rates and those kinds of things. What keeps you up at night? If we were going to just ask you about marriage as a general rule here in America, here in our country, figuratively speaking, what keeps you up at night spiritually, a kind of a thing that's kind of heavy on your heart toward just the union of marriage as it is, with culture pushing back on it, trying to divide it, spiritual enemy that's out there? What's kind of heavy on you?
I think one of the things that Lee and I have spoken out on so much, that really is that thing that you're talking about, is the dangers of cell phones in marriage. I'm not anti-cell phone either. I love my cell phone. But there are so many things that Satan is using that phone for, that is hurting marriages, that sometimes, man, I'm telling you, I know couples that are divorced today that I'd never expected, because somebody started texting someone of the opposite sex they shouldn't have. And before you knew it, they'd built a friendship. You just go down the line and think of different things. To us, we preach over and over and over that the key to just marriage in general is just openness and nakedness as God created marriage. I have no secrets from my wife. She has no secrets from me. She has the passcode of my phone. I have the passcode to her phone. When we drive down the road, if one of us are driving and they're getting texts, the other one's going, hey, read that to me and tell me what it says. We don't have anything hidden from one another. And when you start locking your cell phone so your spouse can't see who you're texting or what you're doing or who you're messaging on social media, you're not headed toward trouble. You're already in trouble. And couples need to realize they need to have some good boundaries for social media and cell phones. And sometimes that's one of those things that you just kind of go, I wish folks would realize how dangerous those can be, and how people play with fire sometimes if they're not paying attention.
That's good. I love that answer, because you I mean, if someone's not doing what you're talking about currently, then they've either thought about it or it's been something they've done in the past. And I think it's widespread. So I'm glad you touched on that. I'll right off of that point that you made, I'll ask this question. Um, what, because if that's happening, there's a chance that that person is searching for something that's vacant in their current situation. Okay. What, how would we go to our spouse before we get in that situation of tracking down an old friend on Facebook from high school or whatever you're talking about texting? What's a way to go to our spouse with maybe those concerns or those things about, hey, I'm not really feeling like this need is met. I don't want to, it's not like you're going to say, I don't want to text this person, but you know what I'm saying? How do you go and bring that up to somebody that you're maybe needing something they're not providing?
Yeah. Well, I think that does happen. There are marriages where somebody's not getting a need met, and before you know it, somebody fills that spot. So I do know that. I also think that there are times on cell phones where people are just going, "Hey, we're just friends," but that friendship turns into more than a friendship, and so sometimes it's not my spouse wasn't meeting that need. It's just that friendship got to be more than a friendship. So that does happen as well.
Okay.
But I think anytime that there is a case where your spouse, you just feel like, hey, we're not connecting here. I think you have to, whether you feel like you've done it a dozen times or not, you've got to open your mouth and you've got to say something. And if you're uncomfortable to say it, we always suggest two things. Number one, ask your spouse, hey, would you sit down with me tonight at about 8 after the kids are in bed for us just to talk for a little while? That puts a little aura of the fact that, hey, we've got a serious conversation coming, and not a 2-minute conversation in the kitchen where I just brought it up and kind of hinted at something. Does that make sense? And so they'll know, hey, this was something that was really, really bothering them. The other thing that we're really scared of is we're really scared of conflict. And you bringing this up to your spouse is probably going to cause some conflict. But can I just say, that's okay. Conflict is healthy, especially if it fixes something. That's a whole lot better to have conflict that fixes something than it is to go on without it being fixed. And I tell people that all the time. They go, how do I tell my spouse this? And how do I do this? And I say, look, you got two options. You can live with it. And I don't suggest that option because you're miserable. Or you can actually speak up and tell them what you're thinking clearly and do it over and over and over until they understand, I get it. Will it cause conflict? Absolutely. But will it fix the situation? It's very, very possible. And we hope that it will. But you gotta, the second thing is, if you're uncomfortable bringing it up face to face, shoot a text off. And, sometimes my wife and I have some really good, serious conversations via text message. And so there's nothing wrong with that. To sometimes, hey, here's something that's really been on my heart lately. And I think we know when one another's being serious. So that's okay as well.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. Communication obviously is key. And it takes courage sometimes to have a hard conversation. But I will say to the people that are fearing the conflict, if you take another route that fills a need in an illegitimate way, guess what conflict's going to arise from that eventually? So I think the level of conflict is way less just addressing it with your spouse and not letting yourself go down there. Because you and I both know, and the Christian men listening, the devil just needs a foothold. He just needs a little bit of a crack in the door for us to pursue a conversation, whether it's a friend or not of the opposite sex. The devil knows how to pounce on that, and he can definitely pour gas on that fire.
And let me throw this out to you guys real quick, because I want to say this as well. No matter how bad things are on marriage right now, no matter where you are in your marriage, no matter what your spouse isn't meeting in your needs, there is never, ever an excuse for you to cheat in your marriage. There's never an excuse for that. Are there times when somebody needs to leave? Absolutely. Are there times when somebody needs to find counseling? Absolutely. Is there time for separation? Absolutely. Is there a time in your marriage that it's ever so bad that you should cheat? Never. Ever.
Yep. That's good. I'm glad you added that. That just compiles the problems. So talk to me about premarital couples for a second. And I have a fairly newlywed, I guess, a little over a year now, my oldest, and then couple other sons that are kind of in that 18 to 23 range. So I know that that's, marriage is coming. My daughter's 16. She won't be married for 40 years. But aside from that, give me some premarital. Let's run through some, and I don't know how many couples you see that are in premarital stages, but what are you seeing being sort of this bridge needing to be built, I guess, the most in couples that are planning to be married or engaged to be married?
Oh, you're going to think we scripted this because you just led me into the perfect conversation.
Okay.
So one of the things that couples need to understand, new statistics out by Gottman Institute, and not just Gottman, but also there have been several other studies that have done this. But new statistics out show that couples that pray together on a daily basis, or on a regular basis, the divorce rate drops to less than 5%. That's outrageous. I mean, absolutely outrageous. That couples, in fact, the one of the Gallup poll had one at couples that pray together daily. It's like less than 1% end in divorce, which tells you there's something to that. And so what I try to do with any couple that I am doing some premarital counseling with is if you can get a couple to connect spiritually before they're married, it will do all kinds of good stuff. And you go, well, what does that mean? Well, find a book that requires you as a couple before you get married to read your Bible together, to pray together. And if you get that as a habit that started before you get married and you go into marriage already praying together and reading your Bible together and connecting spiritually together, man, if somebody came along and said, what is the key to dropping the divorce rate? You cannot ignore the new statistics out that talk about praying together just absolutely drops that, just phenomenal. And so we encourage, we have a book. There's several other books out there that are made for couples, devotional books, to where, ours, you read a chapter of Proverbs together a day, and then there's a couple of questions and there's a prayer prompt, because a lot of couples are, especially dating couples, but even married couples are uncomfortable praying together. And so we actually have a prayer written for you, and you start off by reading it. And by the time your 30 days is up in this book, you're a little more comfortable saying your prayer. But the key today is preparing for your marriage, not just your wedding, and connecting spiritually before you get married. And if you can do those things, you're going to have a great marriage.
Well, what if you were to guess what percentage of couples, not, I guess, married couples, not pre-married, pray together?
I would say very small. I would say less than 20%, and maybe even closer to 10%. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of couples, and Lee and I weren't very good at this early in our marriage. A lot of couples will sit down at a dinner table and pray together. They'll pray together as a family. But we're talking about when you climb into bed with your spouse at night, taking their hand and just saying something as simple as, "Dear God, bless my family, bless my marriage, bless my kids. Thank you for being so good to us. In Jesus' name, amen." And I think it's pretty small, because especially with the men, because I think men are intimidated a little bit with that. But I think what men realize is when they start is they get past that. And they also, when they hear their wives pray, I hear this all the time and I love it. They hear their wives pray and they go, wow, that was really intimate. I got to hear and see a part of her heart that usually she only kind of lets God into. And I think that's where some of that intimacy and that strength comes from in connecting couples, is because you're being even more vulnerable, because you've added not just God to your relationship, but you've both connected with God in your marriage.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. Yeah. No, I have a lot of friends who I don't know if they do that. And I'll be honest, I don't think my wife and I, just she and I pray, just she and I. We've always got a house full of people and we pray as a family unit. And but I think I'm going to start implementing just at night, we get in bed, grab hands, and it doesn't have to be a King James,
No, and it doesn't have to be a
10-minute prayer. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a sit on the couch and pray for 30 minutes. If you want to do that, that's great.
Sure.
But just asking God to bless your marriage every day.
That's right.
And that's the study of the couples that were done, were those people praying together as a couple every day.
Yeah.
And I think men specifically, but couples miss out on this. One of our homework assignments we give at our workshops, we have a 5-day challenge at our workshop about having conversation daily for the next 5 days, sending a sweet note for the next 5 days, being intimate over the next 5 days, praying together over the next 5 days. And that's the one that always kind of makes people a little uncomfortable. But we get more emails back from couples who go, okay, I really doubted this last one on pray, and it's
Game
the one
changer.
that's the best. Yeah, it was a game changer. And
That's
and
good.
we do that all the time. And it's like, they're like, where has this been our whole marriage? And why were we not doing it earlier?
I love it. I love it. So I'm glad you added that. What do you say if I have another question for premarital, people that maybe they're dating and they're in the courting phase, or maybe they're just kind of, guys are in their early 20s are like kind of on, radar, ears up, kind of looking for what possible candidates might be out there. So when you see these couples that are engaged and they're planning their wedding and those kinds of things, what about baggage that each side is bringing in to the marriage? Whether that's in-laws, whether that's past, whether that's just viewpoints on life that maybe they they kind of, hit heads on. What's your advice maybe on kind of eliminating that baggage? I know you need to address it, but how can we make it not such a deal breaker in a relationship?
Yeah, well, one of the mistakes that a lot of couples make is they don't have those conversations, or they go, hey, I know, just for an example, I know he's got an anger problem or a short temper, but we'll work on that after we get married, whatever it is. Well, I hear people go, well, I know this, but that's something we can deal with after we get married. You want couples that are considering marriage, don't go into marriage if there's a red flag where you're sitting. If there's an issue before marriage, it ain't going to change after marriage. You got to get that fixed ahead of time. And so you're going to have the conversations. That's where you need, every couple should do some kind of pre-marriage counseling. Yeah. There's a fantastic book out there called Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. Absolutely incredible. And that makes couples talk about everything from sex to how many children do you want, to what you're going to keep the thermostat on in your house, to, whatever it is. Because what you don't want to do, and I've seen it happen, you get a couple and they get married, and 2 years down the road, he says something or she says something about, when do you want to have kids? I'm really, really ready. I'm excited about this. And he goes, did we not talk about this? I don't want to have kids. And we're like, why did y'all not discuss this before you got married? These were not things to leave to, we'll figure it out when we get down the road somewhere. You've got to have those conversations, and premarital counseling will help bring those out. But definitely, if there's a red flag, man, you listen to those red flags. If somebody is questioning, to me, some big red flags are somebody who talks you out of your relationship with God, or pulls you away from your relationship with God instead of draws you closer to that relationship with God. Somebody that talks you into doing things that you used to would not do. They're just, if you're a single person and you're dating, watch them red flags. Your job during dating and even engagement is to evaluate ruthlessly. Man, everything they do, it is, I need to evaluate this. What do I think? Would this person be husband or wife material?
Right.
Because once you get to marriage, it is no longer time to do that evaluating ruthlessly. You're past that. So do it ahead of time.
Yeah. And sometimes that red flag intensifies after marriage. Like the one that you thought was going to just kind of fade because you would have influence over it and you would kind of work that out of them. Let me tell you, it multiplies almost. Sometimes it intensifies after marriage. So yeah, I'm with you on that. And is that book you're talking about, correct me, is that Leslie Parrott? Do you know?
That's it. That's exactly right. Well done. That's a good book.
Well, my wife and I taught a premarital class at a church. It's been 16, 17 years ago, different church, but that rung a bell when you said that. So yeah, they're really good at that kind of stuff. And got to get it out in the open. You definitely don't want to pull the rug over it and then hope it just goes away. And 5 years in the marriage, it's, tenfold. But in the first year of marriage, what would you say is kind of the most common challenge for couples?
Well, I think mainly the first year of marriage is just trying to get to know each other. It's you go into marriage and you're all in love and you have all these good feelings and and you kind of get on each other's nerves and you're just learning to balance things out. I mean, early in marriage, it's fun. I mean, newlywed stage is a fun stage, but it's one of those stages where you're just kind of trying to figure stuff out. And if you go into marriage, there are blended families out there. And let me say this.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a second marriage and you're coming into your new marriage with kids, that's a whole different game changer. And so you have to understand that a lot of the rules may not apply the same way as they did to someone coming into marriage like we did at
Mm-hmm.
20 years old. And so the main thing is just to be patient with one another in that first year, to spend all the same amount of time, do the same things you did going into marriage. You fell in love because you dated and held hands and flirted with one another and spent time with one. Don't stop those things after you get married. And that generally is more down the road, about 5 to 7 years. Couples get really lazy and they just kind of quit. Why do I need to bring her flowers? She's my wife. I married her. We married 7 years. Why does that still needed? I had a guy actually said that the other day and I was like, are you kidding me? He said, do I really need to spend money on flowers? And I said, yeah. I said, did you spend money on flowers before you got married? And he said, yeah, all the time. And I said, then spend that money on flowers. And he said, I kind of hoped we were past that. And I said, I don't know that you'll ever get past that as long as you're living.
You changed the oil, no problem, in your first year of having that new car, didn't you? But
That's right.
Did you just stop changing it 20 years, 10 years
exactly. That's a good way to put that. You don't ever get 7 years down the road on this car, or 4 years down the road on this car and go, well, I kind of thought we were past that oil changing stage. Man, if you're buying flowers before marriage and sending sweet text messages and taking her on a date, you keep doing those things because that's the guy she fell in love with.
Yeah, that's right. Well, then now that we're talking about that, let's let the conversational pendulum swing over to us 20 plus years of marriage, people. I'll be going, I guess we're going to be 29 this year.
Awesome.
I know are you 35?
36. We're going to be 36 this year. Yeah. I'm excited about
Congrats. Well, for those of us in that 20 plus, man, what have you guys overcome? Without all the gory details, because I mean, if I look at you on social media, you guys look bright, shiny, and perfect. You're the perfect couple. And I know that's not true, but
that's true.
Aside from all the,
not true, yeah.
But what are some things in general terms? Would you say you've gotten a lot better at in the last, 5 years or so than you were, 10 or 20 years ago?
Well, being new empty nesters, that's something that's happened in the last 5 years or 10 years. But we've had our issues like anybody else has. We get on one another's nerves. There are times in our marriage that we love each other. We would die for one another. But there are days we don't like each other very well. That's just part of marriage. There are days when we get frustrated with one another. But those are meant to be few and far between. Occasionally you should have those, but that shouldn't be an everyday thing. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we have tried to do is we have tried to focus more on what our spouse does right than what gets on our nerves. And that's a bad thing that couples do that've been married a long time. They go from focusing on everything their husband or wife does well to focusing on the things that really bothers them. And you're going to notice the things you focus on the most. And so if you're constantly noticing what your spouse does, it drives you crazy, that's what you're going to notice all the time. And that's not a healthy thing. So we've tried really hard to focus more on what our spouse does right. We say thank you for little things. Another thing we've done, my wife does all the laundry. She fired me from laundry years ago when I ruined a load of her clothes. But there's never a time that goes by that she's not washing clothes, carrying a laundry basket, that I don't say thank you for doing my laundry. And if she's folding clothes on the bed, I come in and help. I have mowed our yard and done all the upkeep on cars. That's just something I enjoy doing. She don't want that job. I don't think she's ever started a lawnmower in her life. That doesn't bother me at all. I'm happy to do that. But there's never a time that I don't finish it. She doesn't either say the yards look great or thank you for getting out there and sweating on a 100-degree day. And so we try to still be thankful for those little things that's expected of one another. I expect her to do the laundry. She always has. She expects me to mow the lawn. I always have. But a person who feels appreciated for doing those things will always do more than the person who feels like they're being taken advantage of. And so we tried really hard to do that in a sense of being more appreciative to one another. And so that's
what got you to that point. What got you there? How did you consciously, intentionally sit down and say, hey, let's work on gratitude for these little things? Or did that just something one of you started and the other one kind of followed? And it just
I think we read it in a book. And I think somewhere we like to read marriage books together. And somewhere we read in a book something about how newlyweds do a real good job at overlooking things that their spouse does that gets on their nerves, and they notice the good things in their new spouse. And people who've been married 20 plus years do the opposite. They overlook all the good things their spouse does, and they just notice the things that really drives them nuts. And we kind of took that to heart, and it wasn't a flip the switch and we're better at it. It's taken practice, and we're still not perfect at it. And so we've had to practice it over and over. We had to be intentional with it. And so that has helped a whole lot in that. It's just learning to be intentional with it. And that's gone a long way to being grateful to one another and saying thank you just really helps in everyday life.
Yeah, that's good. And I've tried to be conscientious of knowing what her love language is. And I know that's an age old, philosophy, which is really a good philosophy, those love languages. And I'm sure you guys know each other's and try to cater to each other's. I try not to lose sight of that, because if I know it's speaking to that in her, then I think it's going to go more noticed, obviously. And then it's going to, I don't know, make strides in other areas probably. And I'm not saying we do that in order to get something. I'm just saying if we want a thriving, healthy marriage, it's got to be more of kind of focusing on what the other person needs and wants and is interested in. So what about marriages who, let's say a couple, the husband and wife's interests may be changed. They get together because they have common interests. They are attracted. They have all these things in common. And then years go by, of course, kids, sports, all these things. And then you get to that 25 to 30 years and you're like, she likes this now and I like this now. And those are two different worlds, which nothing wrong with that. But then could that affect intimacy down the road, or emotional intimacy, not just physical intimacy, but could that drive a wedge in the connection of a marriage?
Absolutely. Because marriage is built on friendship. Every person that ever gets married, I've never met a couple yet that I've married that hasn't said, I'm marrying my best friend today. It's because you've spent time with that person, you fall in love with that person, you're hanging out with that person, you're doing things together and having fun. And then sometimes in marriage, he starts doing his own thing, going to the golf course, she starts doing her own thing. And before you know it, a lot of the common interests, nobody falls out of love. Love is a choice. But you do fall out of friendship. And a lot of those couples who sometimes will say, I feel like we've fallen out of love, we don't have that connection. They hadn't fallen out of love, they've fallen out of friendship. They're not spending any time together and doing anything together. And so one of the things we preach hard in our workshops is find common interests and then learn to take an interest in things your spouse likes. Meaning you may have to, every other week go, I'll go ride in the golf carts with you, just to be able to spend some time with you. Lee has learned to do some things with me that I like. In fact, my boys and I are big baseball fans and always has. And she realized years ago she was missing out because we'd have all these great conversations about baseball. And so she started watching baseball with me. And it literally was not long before she said, where has this been my whole life? This is fantastic. I love baseball. And now we go to baseball games together when we're on trips where they have a baseball field. We're going to a baseball game. We have seen multiple stadiums. We talk baseball. We play fantasy baseball together in a league because she won that league last year. I'm trying to figure out how to get her out.
Come on now.
Honestly, it's one of those things. But I've also had to learn to take an interest in things that she likes. She's if you can see stuff behind me, she loves vintage stuff in our home. She loves antiques. I've learned the kind of antiques she's like, the stuff she's interested in. I've learned to stop off at a roadside sale and pick something up because, hey, my wife would like that. I go to flea markets with her, things that years ago I'd have thought, I'm not going to do that. But because it was something that she liked to do, and we've kind of, learned to do that together. And so it's
man.
trying to build those common interests and stuff together.
Anything you can say or do that shows that person that they are at the forefront of your mind, like that you're thinking of them first. And the fact you could have picked at the antique place, you could have picked the absolute worst thing on the table that she would have never laid eyes on. But the fact that it meant you were thinking of her first. And so I think that goes a long way. And so, yeah, as we kind of, land the plane a little bit on this conversation for respect to your time. And I know you got a lot going on. So what can men do better? Not that we're all failing or struggling, which nobody's perfect, but what's one or two things, let's just say, that you've seen, if we haven't talked about them already, if we have, just reiterate, but what's some things you've seen that are just monumental game changers in a marriage and creating more connectivity and emotional intimacy? Yeah.
Well, I'd say number one, men, stop waiting. Stop saying I'll start doing this when my wife starts doing this. Stop the gameplay of I'll start taking her on dates when she starts being more intimate or flirting, whatever it is, and be the one that instigates and initiates. And I would say, you, before marriage, you were the one that planned the date nights. You were asking her constantly, when are you free next? Because you want to spend time with her. After marriage, you're kind of like, well, tell me what night we're going and I'll make sure I clear my schedule. And she's tired of that. Plan the date night. Plan the whole night and just ask her, hey, is next Thursday good? Can you line up a sitter if I plan the night? Go out to eat, go see a movie, go play putt-putt golf, go bowling, whatever it is. Find something to do for y'all together and start a regular date night at the minimum once every couple of weeks. Even if you are if you're in an empty nest and you're going, hey, we don't even have kids anymore, you should be once every couple of weeks, have a night where y'all are going to go out where you can have supper together and just spend some time doing some fun stuff together. That is very, very healthy. And I promise you, she'll know that you're putting out some effort to do that. And then I would also tell those guys out there, educate yourself. Best thing you can do. Find a good marriage podcast to listen to, read a marriage book. There's some fantastic marriage books out there. Educate yourself. Don't be the guy who goes, that calls me, and we hear them a lot, that calls me and goes, can you help me save my marriage? My wife has walked out and she's told me these 10 things that I needed to do. And I'm like, you hadn't been doing those, and he's like, I didn't know I was supposed to. And it's like, man, these are basic things that should be a part of every marriage. And so, the best thing those guys can do is just step up and take as much interest in your marriage as you do your hobbies and your work and everything else.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And guys, also will use the excuse of, and it's not really an excuse, it could be a valid reason, but we don't have the money for X, where every dollar is spent before we make it, kind of thing. I can't go to a date night. I can't plan an elaborate look. Honestly, and I've done this long ago before we had the resources and all that, but you can make a sandwich or two. You can throw some chips in a bag. Y'all can drive out to the lake. You can sit on the tailgate of your truck that you spend, $2 or $3 grand a month on. You can go sit out there and you can just eat a sandwich with you. Because I was shocked at the lengths that went to make her happy, and that was a small thing, and she appreciated it. But that's been years ago. I could probably do that again. But yeah, for the guys that say, I don't really have the money or the resources to make a date night happen.
That is a garbage excuse. And I'm sorry, that sounds pretty harsh, but it is. If that's your excuse, because you can take a picnic and go to the park. Go to Dairy Queen and get a Blizzard after the kids are in bed and sit on the porch with your wife. Go for a walk at the park. Man, that is one of the best things. I hear wives all the time saying one of my favorite things is when my husband and I go on a walk, because neither of us can look at our phone. We just have some alone time. That's free. Last time I checked, a picnic at the park and a walk is free.
That's right.
So don't give me this lame excuse of, hey, I don't have money for a concert. We're not talking concerts. Go to a stinking dollar menu and order off the value menu and go have some fun.
That's good. No, I like it. That's the kind of harsh, real talk that our guys like to hear. So, well, Trey, it's been great seeing you again, man. What are some ways we can support you guys? Where can we find your resources and that kind of thing?
We would love for to have some guys. Let me tell you this to the guys that are listening. Sometimes wives drag their husbands to our workshops, and our husbands are the ones. The husbands are the ones that leave our workshop going, "Man, that was good. I am glad that I came." All I want to say is, if you're a husband and you fear something like a marriage workshop, at least I know that ours is a lot of fun. We use a lot of humor, and I can guarantee you will leave there going, "I am glad that I did this." You can find information on our workshops at treyandlee.com. And that's LEA.com, treyandlee.com. You can Google us and it'll take you to our website. But we do workshops all over the U.S. We're going to be in the Houston area, I think next year in the Woodlands area. And then we have people fly in from all over the U.S. to workshops when we do them in towns that have a big airport. So just come spend a weekend. I promise you, it'd be the best money you've spent. It'll recharge your marriage. It'll give you a boost in the arm, and you won't regret it.
That's cool. That's awesome. Well, that's right in my backyard. So you got to let me know ahead of time when you're doing that. And I'll go look on the website as well. But no, that's been great. That's been needed. I guarantee some guys walking away different than they showed up. So with that, he's been in the one and only Trey Morgan. We've been last in line. Be blessed.